Welcome to Stillwater Chronicles. Tonight, we settle into a story about a blind woman who sells things that cannot be named. There is something about a night market that feels like the inside of a dream. Not a dream you can describe clearly in the morning, not one with a plot or faces you can name, but the kind that lives in your body for the rest of the day as a feeling, a warmth, a low-grade longing for something you cannot identify. That is the feeling Mei-Ling carried with her when she first walked into the Rauhe Street night market on a Thursday evening in October. She'd not meant to go. She'd been walking, the way you walk when staying still feels unbearable, moving through the city, the way water moves through a pipe. Not because it wants to, but because it has nowhere else to go. Her mother had died 11 days before. She had taken the week off work. She had sat in the apartment, rearranged objects on shelves, washed the same cup 3 times. And then she had put on her shoes and simply started walking. The market found her. That was how it felt. Not that she found it. She knew where it was, had been 100 times, but that on this particular night, in this particular grief, the market opened itself to her the way a door opens to someone who has been standing in the cold long enough. She walked through the red gate. The smell hit her first. Grilled corn brushed with butter and chili. The caramelized sweetness of wheel cakes, their batter bubbling at the edges. Scallion pancakes, kong yu bing, pressed flat and crisping on iron griddles. The green of the onion going translucent in the heat. And underneath it all, something older and harder to name. Something that smelled like the memory of rain on warm stone. The noise came next. 1,000 conversations layered over each other until they became a single sound. Not loud, exactly, but full, textured. The way silence sometimes feels full, in certain rooms, in certain hours of the night. Mei-Ling walked slowly. She was not shopping. She was not hungry. She was, in the truest sense of the word, simply present. More present, perhaps, than she had been in 11 days. Because here there was so much to receive that grief had to move aside a little to make room. The market ran long and narrow, stalls pressed against both walls of the lane. The center a river of people moving mostly forward, occasionally eddying at something that caught their eye. Red lanterns hung overhead at intervals, their glow diffuse and amber, the color of old photographs. Vendors called out, mostly for the benefit of tourists, mostly ignored by the regulars, who had their own routes, their own rituals. Mei-Ling drifted. She paused at a stall selling preserved plums in little paper bags, the kind her mother had always bought at New Year, and eaten slowly, one by one, as though they were something precious. She did not buy any. She stood there for a moment, long enough that the vendor gave her a questioning look, and then she moved on. She passed the snake alley that branched off to one side. Closed now, or at least quieter. Most of the hawkers gone home. She passed the fortune teller whose small booth had a laminated menu of services on the wall. She passed a woman selling handmade socks printed with cartoon animals. She passed a stall that appeared from a distance to sell only things that were blue. And then she saw the old woman, or perhaps she did not see her so much as notice her. There is a difference You see things that announce themselves. You notice things that have simply been there all along, quiet and patient, waiting for you to be ready. The stall was not much. A folding table, the kind you might find in any storage room in any apartment building, covered with a cloth of indeterminate color. On the cloth were objects, not many, perhaps 15 or 20, arranged with a care that suggested someone had thought deeply about the arrangement, though no obvious logic governed it. Some were small and could have been stones. Some were wrapped loosely in paper that had darkened at the edges. Some were shapes Mei-Ling could not quite resolve into anything familiar. The woman behind the table was very old. Old in the way of things that have stopped counting. Not frail, exactly, but settled. She sat on a low stool, her hands resting on her thighs, her posture very still. Her eyes were open, but they were the eyes of someone who had learned to navigate the world through everything that was not sight. She had the quality of an old tree in a courtyard, there by choice, it seemed, or by something older than choice. She was blind. Mei-Ling knew this immediately, though she could not have explained how. Perhaps it was the way the old woman did not track the movement of the crowd. Perhaps it was the particular angle of her face, tilted slightly upward, as though she was reading the air rather than the people in front of her. Around the table, there were perhaps 6 or 7 people. Not a crowd, a gathering. They stood at the edges of the cloth, some crouching slightly to look more closely at the objects on the table, some simply standing with their hands in their pockets. None of them were tourists. Mei-Ling was certain of this, though she couldn't say why. They had the look of people who had been here before, who had come back for reasons they could not have explained to anyone who asked. Mei-Ling stopped. She had not meant to stop. She had been drifting, as she said, following her feet and nothing else. But her feet had stopped, and her body had followed, and now she was standing at the edge of the little gathering, looking at the objects on the table. The woman behind the table turned her head. Not toward Mei-Ling, not exactly, but her chin lifted slightly, and there was something in the angle of it that felt like attention, felt like being noticed, felt like being found. Mei-Ling took a step closer. The objects on the table were, each of them, strange. Not obviously strange, not the strangeness of things that don't belong. The strangeness of things that belong somewhere else, that have arrived here by accident, that are waiting for the right person to recognize them. One was a small cylinder, perhaps the length of a finger, made of something that might have been bone, or might have been very smooth wood. One was a length of dark cord, tied with 3 knots at uneven intervals. One was a flat disc, no bigger than a coin, that caught the amber lantern light and held it in a way the coin should not have been able to, as though it were not reflecting the light, but storing it. None of them were labeled. There were no prices written anywhere, and yet the people around the table were clearly there to buy. Mei-Ling watched as a man of perhaps 50 reached out and picked up one of the wrapped parcels, turned it over in his hands, and then placed it down. He said nothing. The old woman said nothing. He picked up a different object, a small, dark stone that was somehow darker than its surroundings, and something passed between them, though no words were exchanged. And he placed the stone in his pocket. and took out a small roll of bills and set them carefully on the corner of the cloth. The old woman accepted this without looking at it. Of course she did. She could not see it. Mei-Ling watched a young woman do the same, choose without choosing somehow, her hand moving across the objects on the table until it settled on the knotted cord. And then the same quiet exchange, the same small roll of bills on the corner of the cloth. There was no haggling, no conversation. The air around the table had the quality of a place where conversation would have been wrong, like speaking in a library or laughing at a funeral. Not forbidden, just unnecessary. Mei-Ling did not know how long she stood there. At some point, the people who had been there when she arrived had gone. New people had come and gone in turn, and she had not moved. The amber light shifted slightly as a lantern above her swayed in a breath of wind she could not feel. The noise of the market continued its thousand-conversation hum all around her. But here, at this small table with its dark objects and its patient old woman, the air was somehow quieter. Not silent. Quieter. The way a room becomes quieter when someone you trust walks into it. The old woman turned her head again. This time Mei-Ling was certain. Certain that the attention was aimed at her, specific as a finger pointing. The woman's eyes were open, dark, entirely still. They did not move. They simply rested in her direction. And Mei-Ling felt. She would have trouble describing this later, when she tried. She felt seen, not looked at. Seen. The way you feel seen when someone understands something about you that you have not said aloud, that you have barely admitted to yourself. She stepped up to the table. The objects were even stranger up close. Not threatening. She would be clear about that in the telling. She felt no fear at the table, only a heightened alertness. The way the air feels before rain, when everything is more itself. The small disk still held its impossible light. The knotted cord lay where the young woman had put it down after choosing something else. A new object had appeared. Or perhaps she had not noticed it before. A small square of dark cloth, folded into a shape that looked almost like a bird, but wasn't quite. Mei-Ling let her hand move over the table. She was not sure what she was looking for. She was not sure she was looking for anything, but her hand moved the way a hand moves in the dark when you cannot see, not grasping, not directed, just open, feeling for the shape of things. Her fingers came to rest on something. She looked at it. It was a small glass bottle, very small, the kind that might hold a single dose of perfume, sealed with a dark wax stopper. The glass was cloudy in a way that was not dirty. The cloudiness distributed evenly, intentional. Inside it, she could see almost nothing. A suggestion of color, perhaps. Something pale. She picked it up. It was lighter than she expected. Not light as in weightless. Light as in settled. The way objects feel when they have been in the right place for a long time. The warmth of it surprised her. Warmer than the ambient air. Warmer than her own hand. As though it were generating something. The old woman spoke. She spoke in Mandarin, in a voice that was low and unhurried, and entirely without ceremony. She said, "Keep it until you no longer need it, then give it away." She said nothing else. Mei-Ling looked at her. The still face, the open eyes, the hands resting on her thighs. She wanted to ask what it was. She wanted to ask how much. She wanted to ask how the woman had known she would come, because she was certain, holding the bottle, that the woman had known. The certainty was not logical, and she did not try to make it logical. It simply was. She asked nothing. She placed a folded bill on the corner of the cloth. She did not know if the amount was right. She did not look to the old woman for confirmation. She simply placed it there and closed her fingers around the small warm bottle and stepped back from the table. The market continued around her. Someone was calling out the price of stinky tofu 3 stalls down. A child laughed, high and sudden, somewhere behind her. A scooter horn sounded, muffled, from the street beyond the gate. The 1,000 conversations continued their single texture, warm and restless. Mei-Ling walked home. She held the bottle in her hand the whole way. She could not explain what happened next. She tried, once, to a friend who was the kind of person who listened without needing explanations to be logical. She said, "It felt like something loosened, like something that had been held tight for a very long time, in her chest, in the base of her throat, in the space between her shoulder blades, had simply let go. Not all at once. Slowly over the days that followed, like a knot that unravels from the inside, strand by strand, in no hurry. The grief did not leave. She would be clear about that too, in the telling. The grief stayed, but something else had been there alongside the grief. Something that was not grief, that had nothing to do with her mother. Something older and more private than that. And that thing was different. That thing was lighter. That thing she could breathe around. She had not told anyone about the problem it solved. She had not told anyone it existed. She had barely told herself. She kept the bottle on the small table beside her bed. She did not open it. She never opened it. She found somehow that the question of what was inside it had ceased to feel urgent. That it was the object itself, its warmth, and its weight, and its cloudy glass, that mattered. Like a door that does not need to be opened to know it is unlocked. 3 months later, she went back to the market. She found the table, the cloth, the objects, different this time, all of them different, arranged with the same unhurried care. And she found the old woman, sitting on her low stool, her hands on her thighs, her open eyes resting on the middle distance. Mei-Ling placed the small glass bottle on the corner of the cloth. The old woman's chin lifted slightly. That same attentiveness, that same feeling of being found. She reached out and her fingers, without hesitation, without searching, moved directly to the bottle. And she picked it up and placed it among the other objects on the table. Mei-Ling stood for a moment. Then she said, in a voice she had not planned to use, "How did you know?" The old woman was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Mei-Ling thought she had decided not to answer. Long enough that the amber light shifted and a child ran past laughing, and a vendor 3 stalls down began his call for stinky tofu. Again. The same rhythm. The same words. Then the woman said, simply, "I didn't. You did." She said nothing else. Mei-Ling walked home through the yellow warmth of the market, through the smell of grilled corn and scallion pancakes and the older smell underneath. Rain on warm stone or something like it. And she thought about that answer for a long time. For months. For longer than she expected. She thought about it in the way you think about something that has no answer, but also, somehow, does not need one. She never went back. Not because the market was gone. The market was always there. But she found, as the months passed, that she no longer needed to. That whatever the table had given her was not in the bottle at all. That it had, perhaps, always been in her. Waiting, like an object on a table, for the right hand to find it. The old woman still comes to the market. She is always there, on the left side, past the snake alley, past the fortune teller's laminated menu. She sits on her low stool with her hands in her lap and her open eyes facing forward. Around her, objects are arranged with careful patience. Most people walk past without noticing. A few stop. Some of those stay long enough to choose something. Or to be chosen, which is perhaps the same thing. They place their bills on the corner of the cloth. They carry their objects home. No one has ever asked her what the objects do, perhaps because they already know, or perhaps because some questions, once asked, lose the answer they were looking for. Thank you for listening to Stillwater Chronicles, where even the darkest markets can carry a quiet light. If this story stayed with you, if the warmth of that amber lantern settled somewhere deep, then let it remain a little while longer. Some things, after all, find their way to us when we are ready, and some doors do not need to be opened to know they are unlocked. Rest now. The night market will always be there,